In a quiet corner of the mountains, where mist lingers over the pines and time seems to hold its breath, a wounded bobcat was brought back from the edge. He had every reason to return to the wild, every instinct calling him home. But when freedom opened its gate, he turned away. Behind the glass waited a tiny silver kitten, fragile, trembling, and alone. Something in her cry reached what no medicine could heal. From that moment, the wild and the gentle began to share one heartbeat. And the valley would never forget the day a predator chose love over freedom. The wind roared through Aspen Valley like a wild creature freed from its chains. Snow swirled in heavy sheets, wrapping the forest in white fury. The roofs of the refuge rattled under gusts that screamed down from the ridges, and the old trees bent like giants in pain. Inside the wooden office, Dr. Eleanor Hayes jerked awake as the lights flickered. Her desk lamp blinked twice before dying, leaving the room in shadows. She sat up, heart beating faster than she liked to admit, and listened to the storm pressing at the windows like a living thing. She had weathered countless blizzards in 20 years at the Aspen Valley Wildlife Refuge, but this one felt different, closer, almost personal. Then came the sound that pulled her from the warmth of her cot. A cry, high, thin, and trembling. It rose above the wind, breaking through the howl like a plea. Eleanor swung her legs to the floor and reached for her parka. Her breath came in short clouds as she stepped into her boots, grabbed a flashlight, and pushed through the door. Snow hit her face with the sting of sand. The cold bit through every layer of clothing as she fought her way toward the enclosures. The floodlights along the path were half buried under snowdrifts, but she could still see the outline of the bobcat's pen. The chain-link fence shook violently, as if something inside was trying to escape. The growl that came from within made her stop mid-step. Rowan. The male bobcat they had rescued 3 months ago. She raised the beam of her flashlight and found him pacing, tail lashing, amber eyes wide and wild. He wasn't reacting to her presence, he was looking past her, toward the black line of forest behind the fence. His muscles rippled beneath his fur, and he released a deep, throaty sound that made her spine prickle. "Easy, Rowan," she called, her voice trembling in the storm. The bobcat didn't calm. He pressed his body against the wire, pupils flaring, ears pointed forward. His breath clouded the air as he stared into the dark. Something out there had him agitated beyond reason. Eleanor turned her flashlight toward the tree line. The beam wavered across snowdrifts and branches. For a moment she saw nothing, and then a shape moved, small, half buried in the snow near a fallen pine. Her stomach dropped. She waded through the drifts until the beam caught a patch of gray fur. Kneeling down, she brushed away the snow with her bare hands. It was a kitten, barely breathing, no bigger than her palm. Its fur was soaked and clumped, and its tiny ribs lifted weakly with each shallow gasp. She scooped it into her hands, feeling its faint warmth against her skin. "Hang on, sweetheart," she whispered, tucking it inside her coat. Behind her, Rowan growled again, but not with anger. It was low, drawn out, almost mournful. Eleanor turned back toward him. He stood perfectly still now, his golden eyes locked on her coat, on the fragile life hidden inside. He made another sound softer, more like a churring purr than a threat. Eleanor hurried back through the storm, shielding the kitten from the snow. The building loomed like a ghost behind the curtain of white. Her boots slipped twice on the ice. But she didn't stop until she reached the treatment room door. The heat inside struck her face as she kicked the door shut. She placed the kitten on a towel under the examination lamp. Its body was limp, fur icy, cold to the touch. She rubbed its chest gently with a cloth, whispering encouragements as she prepared a syringe of warm fluids. The kitten gave a small, broken sound, its sides quivering. "That's it, stay with me," she murmured. She wrapped it in a soft blanket and placed it on a heated pad. Its heartbeat fluttered like a trapped bird under her fingertips. For a moment she thought she'd lost it. Then it gasped, shuddered, and released a weak mewl. Relief washed through her so sharply it almost hurt. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, but beneath that came another sound, steady, rhythmic, calling through the storm. Rowan was still awake. He was making the same low rumble, a voice vibrating from deep in his chest, like a lullaby meant for something fragile. Eleanor worked through the night, checking vitals, changing the fluids, whispering soft words she didn't realize she was saying. Each time the kitten stirred, Rowan answered with another low hum from the dark. It was absurd, yet comforting, like the storm itself had rhythm. By dawn, the storm began to die. Snow glittered in pale light through the window. Eleanor yawned, stiff from sitting all night on the cold floor. She looked down at her tiny patient. The kitten slept, nose twitching, chest rising steadily. Its fur had dried to a silvery gray sheen. She poured herself coffee and stepped outside, the cup steaming in her gloved hands. The world was hushed, blanketed in snow so thick it muted every sound. Rowan's enclosure was half buried, but he was awake, sitting at the edge near the gate, eyes fixed on the clinic window. As she approached, he made a sound she'd never heard from any wild cat before, a soft, vibrating chirr, almost tender. He didn't move, just watched her calmly, the anger from the night gone. Eleanor followed his gaze to the window. She knew what he was looking at. Inside, the kitten stirred, tiny head turning toward the light. It gave a faint cry, not of pain, but confusion. Rowan's ears flicked instantly, his body tightening as though ready to protect. The sound passed through Eleanor's chest like a ripple of electricity. Wild creatures didn't care for others outside their kind. They didn't cry into the wind for lost souls, and they didn't call to newborn kittens through a night of snow. But as the morning sun touched the valley, Eleanor felt that some silent truth had changed. Something old and wild had crossed an invisible line. She turned back toward the building, her boots crunching softly over the snow. Rowan's gaze followed her, steady and unblinking. "Maybe we're both not ready to let go," she said quietly. The bobcat blinked once, slow and deliberate, as if he understood. Inside, warmth filled the treatment room. The kitten stretched a paw, let out a sigh, and tucked itself deeper into the blanket. Outside, Rowan curled in the snow, head resting on his paws, facing the window like a silent guardian. The world was still, the bond already forming between wild heart and fragile life. And in that stillness, with the valley blanketed by snow and morning light spilling over the mountains, Dr. Eleanor Hayes realized that something extraordinary had begun, a story of loss, love, and the quiet defiance of a creature who would one day refuse freedom itself for the smallest reason imaginable. Morning brought the kind of quiet that follows every storm, the kind that feels heavy, like the world itself is holding its breath. Inside the refuge, the smell of coffee mixed with antiseptic and wet fur. Dr. Eleanor Hayes checked the small bundle on the heating pad, the gray kitten still fighting for its fragile life. Its breathing was shallow but rhythmic. The fur, once matted and cold, now shimmered faintly under the lamplight. Eleanor adjusted the blanket, whispering softly as if afraid her voice might tip the balance between life and loss. "You're tougher than you look, little one," she murmured. She scribbled notes on her clipboard. Body temp stabilized. Heart weak, but steady. For 20 years, she'd written those same words about owls, foxes, and deer, but never about a house cat. Yet something in the way this one clung to life made her pause longer than she expected. The clinic door opened with a rush of cold air. Liam Turner stepped in, his parka dusted with snow, gloves tucked in his belt. He was 35, tall, with warm brown eyes that could calm the most anxious creature. "Heard you pulled an all-nighter again," he said, smiling faintly. Eleanor nodded, her silver-gray ponytail brushing the collar of her flannel. "Found her outside the Bobcat pen, barely breathing." Liam leaned closer, eyes softening at the sight. "You named her yet?" Eleanor hesitated, then said, "Ash." "Found her in the ashes of the storm." Liam chuckled quietly, the sound filling the sterile room with warmth. "Fitting. She looks like a survivor." He reached for the kitten's paw, barely the size of a thumb. Ash twitched and let out a tiny mewl that made them both laugh softly. For a brief second, the refuge didn't feel so lonely. From outside came a low sound, a deep, rolling churring that Eleanor recognized instantly. Rowan. She walked to the frosted window and saw him pacing near the fence line, snow still clinging to his fur. "He hasn't left that spot since last night," she said. Liam followed her gaze, brow furrowing. "Strange," he murmured. "He's never been this restless." Rowan paused, staring directly at the window where the light glowed around Eleanor's silhouette. For a moment, the wild cat and the human seemed caught in the same quiet understanding. Then his tail flicked once, and he settled down again. By noon, Ash stirred weakly, tiny head wobbling as she tried to move. Eleanor smiled, her weary eyes softening. She prepared the formula bottle, testing the temperature on her wrist, then guided the nipple to the kitten's mouth. After a moment, Ash latched on, suckling with desperate determination. The sound of life, gentle, rhythmic, filled the small room. Liam exhaled like he'd been holding his breath all morning. "She's going to make it," he said quietly. Eleanor didn't answer, but the corners of her mouth turned upward. She'd seen enough miracles to know when one was happening. Later that afternoon, the wind carried new light through the windows. Rowan stirred again, this time sitting upright, ears twitching toward the soft noises inside. He let out another rumble, quieter now, like a parent calling softly to reassure. The sound made Ash pause mid-feed, tiny ears flicking. Eleanor froze. "You hear that?" she whispered. Liam nodded slowly. He's talking to her. They shared a look that balanced between disbelief and wonder. Science said animals didn't bond across species, but sometimes the heart ignored the rulebook. Over the next hours, Rowan remained outside, a silent guardian. When the kitten slept, he lay down facing the window. When she stirred, he lifted his head as though keeping watch. The behavior defied everything Eleanor had learned, but she couldn't deny what she saw. Night fell again, painting the snow in silver and blue. Eleanor dimmed the lights and lingered at the door before leaving. She looked once more at the sleeping kitten, then at the faint shape of Rowan beyond the glass. The wild cat's eyes reflected the lantern's glow, bright as molten amber. Before going to bed, she wrote in her logbook, "Rowan remains unusually alert. Suspect sensory fixation." But even as she wrote it, she knew it wasn't just instinct. It was connection, raw, inexplicable, unscientific, but real as the heartbeat under that tiny ribcage. Liam stayed behind to take the night shift. He moved quietly, refilling Ash's formula and checking the temperature gauge. When he glanced out the window, Rowan was still there, unmoving, breath fogging the air. The wildcat's patience was eerie, like a soldier standing guard. Near midnight, Liam heard a faint cry. Not from Ash, but from Rowan. It wasn't a growl or warning. It was softer, broken, almost mournful. The sound sent chills down his spine. He stepped closer to the glass, whispering, "What are you trying to say, boy?" Outside, Rowan pressed his forehead against the fence, eyes reflecting sorrow that didn't belong to a predator. Inside, Ash whimpered in her sleep, curling tighter into the blanket. Liam felt something stir deep inside, a recognition that the storm had changed more than the weather. When Eleanor returned at dawn, she found Liam half asleep in a chair beside the heater. "He didn't leave," he mumbled. She looked through the window. Rowan was still there, a mound of fur against the snow. "Neither did I," she said softly, her voice thick with something she couldn't name. The valley was silent except for the faint breathing of 3 survivors. The woman, the wildcat, and the kitten bound together by something wordless, something that had crossed the fragile border between instinct and empathy. The world outside was frozen still, but inside Aspen Valley, something warm had begun to grow. Rowan woke with the valley, breath rising in pale ribbons as light climbed the pines. The storm had scoured the world clean. He lay pressed to the fence, muscles loose, ears tuned to the clinic door, waiting for the smallest sound that meant the tiny heartbeat lived. When the latch clicked, his head lifted. Eleanor stepped out with her coffee, and the scent of warm milk drifted after her. Rowan did not pace. He settled like stone at the gate, tail low, eyes steady, as if stillness itself could calm whatever trembled inside. Inside the clinic, A thin mule answered the morning. Rowan's ears pivoted first, then his whole body aligned with the window. The old hurt in his leg tugged when he rose, but he ignored it. The sound drew him the way rivers draw winter deer to unfrozen banks. Liam approached the fence and crouched. He kept his hands to himself, made his voice low and even. Rowan watched the man's shoulders, the coffee steam, the respectful space. He accepted the presence without flinch, but his gaze never left the rectangle of glass. By mid-morning, Eleanor rolled a steel cart to the window. On it, the incubator hummed softly. The kitten slept inside, breath fluttering like a moth against paper. Rowan stepped closer, chest brushing the wire. A deep rumble started low and held like a vow. Eleanor watched his whiskers fan, his pupils soften, his shoulders loosen by degrees. She noted the metrics out of habit, but the real data was in the change of his breath, slower now, matching the kitten's tiny rise and fall. She wrote nothing for a long time. They ran a simple trial. Liam eased the incubator 2 paces away from the window. Rowan rose to his feet at once, tail rigid, ears forward. The rumble broke into restless calls. Ash stirred, unsettled, and the room carried a fragile tension that felt breakable. Liam inched the cart back to the glass. Rowan's body lowered again, paws tucked neatly, the rumble returning to its steady line. Ash settled, nose twitching once, then quiet. The numbers on Eleanor's monitor climbed a point and held. Her jaw relaxed. They tried again, longer this time. With distance, Rowan's breathing turned shallow. A ripple along the ribs that told of old pain returned. He pressed his forehead to the wire and stayed there, eyes fixed on the small gray blur in the glow of the lamp. Eleanor stepped outside, snow squeaking under her boots. Up close, Rowan was not a myth from the timberline, but muscle and scar and winter-thick coat. His right hind leg bore the memory of steel. She saw power restrained by choice and felt the weight of it. A jay scolded from the trees, and Rowan barely flicked an ear. The world beyond the fence had smells and stories, but the window held the single thing he would not release. He breathed, and the breath fogged the mesh where his whiskers brushed metal. Afternoon brought a break in the clouds. Sun warmed the fence, and Rowan shifted to keep the light off the glass, a living windbreak. When gusts rose, he broadened his stance and held still, as if he could stop the cold from climbing through the pain. Liam filmed from a respectful distance, lens low, frame wide, no bait, no calls. The footage caught the way Rowan's tail tip tapped twice when Ash sneezed, the way his ears relaxed when Eleanor laughed under her breath. It was gentleness without training. Eleanor adjusted her thinking before she adjusted her notes. She did not write fixation. She wrote alignment. She did not write anomaly. She wrote response. Language became careful as the stakes of meaning grew. Each word chosen like a step on ice. Near dusk, she opened the side gate and set a second barrier outside the window, a safe lane between enclosures. Rowan did not rush it. He waited for a cue that never came, then advanced one slow pace, placing each paw with the silence of falling ash. He lowered himself parallel to the sill. Inside, Ash blinked, eyes the color of distant lakes. The kitten lifted a paw no bigger than a dry leaf and pressed it to the warm side of the glass. Rowan's whiskers brushed the cold side, and the rumble deepened. Wind lifted the edge of Eleanor's scarf. She held her breath without meaning to, counting the beats in Rowan's throat. The rhythm matched the kitten's tiny breaths with uncanny precision. A duet of lungs that had never shared a den yet met in time. A truck passed on the county road, and Rowan's head turned just enough to mark it, then returned. His priorities had been sorted by some interior compass: the snow, the forest, the ancient call to roam, all bent around a single point like iron to a magnet. Night arrived blue and uncomplicated. Eleanor dimmed the clinic lights and placed Ash closer to the glass than she would have yesterday. The monitor hummed. Rowan stayed where he was, heat leaking from his body into the drift, patience anchoring him there. Liam brought a fresh bale and wedged it to block the wind at Rowan's flank. The bobcat glanced once, accepted the gift with the indifference of the truly focused, and returned to his vigil. Acceptance was its own language, understood without ceremony. Eleanor stood in the doorway a long time. She thought of traps and gunmetal, of the soft thud of bodies falling in snow, of all the nights she had told herself that wild hearts heal best alone. Rowan exhaled, slow and even, and the glass did not fog. Before midnight, a cloud crossed the moon, and the clinic went dim. In the half-dark, the window brightened like a lake at dawn. Rowan rested his head on his paws and kept his eyes on Ash, unblinking, a lighthouse beam set to the smallest harbor in the world. The thaw came slowly to Aspen Valley. By late February, the snow softened into slush, and the air carried the faint scent of pine sap and mud. Rowan paced the edge of his enclosure, every muscle a map of contained power. The scar on his hind leg, pale against russet fur, caught the morning light like a thread of silver. He had begun to eat again, but only when the window lights glowed. When the kitten mewed, he lifted his head before any human could move. To Eleanor, the pattern was no longer curiosity, it was ritual. Each sunrise began with his rumble and ended with his stillness facing the clinic. She kept her distance, notebook in one hand, coffee in the other. Observation had always been her craft, but now she caught herself wondering what he remembered when the wind shifted or when snowmelt trickled under the fence. Wild things carried history without language, and it frightened her how much he seemed to understand. Rowan's world had narrowed to the fence, the window, and the stretch of sky above the trees. Yet sometimes, when the wind came from the west, he turned sharply toward the forest and froze. His nostrils flared, tail stiffening, body caught in invisible tension. Then, just as quickly, he sank back down, eyes dimming. Liam noticed it too. "He's tracking something," he said one morning, camera resting at his knee. Not prey memory. The phrase stuck with Eleanor. Memory. It was what science couldn't quantify, but emotion couldn't ignore. She decided to check the intake report again. The file lay buried under weeks of paperwork. She brushed the dust from its corner, reading the coordinates where Rowan had been found. Burnt Ridge, 30 miles south. A photograph clipped to the form showed a trap half buried in snow. And in the background, a shape the blurred outline of another bobcat. Smaller, lifeless. Her chest tightened. She read further. Evidence of second feline body female, pregnant, presumed mate, shot by illegal poacher, estimated within 24 hours of capture. The words blurred as she read them twice, then a third time. She whispered, "My God." Outside, Rowan sat upright, tail coiled around his paws, gaze fixed on the forest line as if waiting for something that would never return. When a gust of wind swept through, his ears turned toward it, and a low sound came from deep within his chest, a sound closer to grief than hunger. That afternoon, Eleanor walked to the fence and crouched. "You were never just healing a wound," she said softly. Rowan blinked. The golden reflection of her coat mirrored in his eyes. He didn't move, but his breathing slowed, as if her voice steadied the space between them. Liam approached behind her. "You found something," he said quietly. Eleanor nodded, eyes still on the bobcat. He lost her. Maybe lost them both. The silence that followed felt too fragile to break. Snow dripped from the fence, melting into muddy veins that ran toward the trees. Rowan turned his head toward the window. Inside, Ash played clumsily with the hem of a towel, her silver fur catching the lamplight. The bobcat's ears flicked, and his expression softened. The transformation was subtle but profound. His body eased, his tail uncoiled, and he released a breath that looked like surrender. That night, Eleanor sat alone in her office, the file spread open beside a flickering lamp. The photograph of Burnt Ridge stared back. She imagined Rowan limping through that landscape, snow red under his paws, searching until exhaustion became instinct. The kitten's cry must have sounded like something remembered. She closed her notebook and stepped outside. The moon hung low, a dull coin in the sky. Rowan lay near the fence, fur luminous under its glow. When she approached, he raised his head and met her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, unsure if it was for him or herself. Wind moved through the pines with the hush of distant voices. Rowan's pupils widened, catching starlight. For a heartbeat, Eleanor thought she saw him look past her to a shape that wasn't there, a ghost moving between snow and shadow. Then he exhaled, slow and steady, anchoring himself back to the living. In the days that followed, Rowan's habits changed. He no longer prowled the perimeter or tested the fence. Instead, he began to sit closer to the clinic, his presence constant but calm. Each evening, he curled beside the same spot, the glass reflecting his amber eyes like lanterns in the dark. Ash grew stronger, her playfulness filling the quiet rooms with small sounds. Rowan's rumble became her lullaby. He seemed content just to watch, as though he had chosen to protect rather than possess. In him, wildness had learned restraint. In her, fragility had learned courage. Eleanor sometimes found herself standing by the window, arms crossed, coffee cold in her hand. She watched Rowan's steady form beyond the fence and felt the sharp ache of understanding. Grief, she thought, was not something you escaped. It was something you lived beside until it changed its shape. Spring arrived without ceremony. The snow withdrew from the valley, revealing brown earth and green shoots. Rowan blinked against the new light, stretching as warmth seeped into his bones. When he looked through the window now, it wasn't out of longing, it was recognition. The storm inside him had found a place to rest. On one of those mornings, as mist lifted from the hills, Eleanor whispered to Liam, "He's remembering differently now." Liam nodded, his camera quiet in his lap. "Not loss," he said, "but belonging." Rowan turned his head toward their voices and blinked slowly, the language of trust requiring no sound at all. By early spring, Aspen Valley stirred with life again. Snowmelt whispered through the gullies, and the pine canopy swayed with soft wind. Rowan's enclosure no longer looked like a cage, but a small patch of forest reborn. He moved slower now, his limp barely visible, the scar on his hind leg fading beneath new fur. Inside the clinic, Ash had doubled in size. Her once weak limbs were now steady, paws playful, eyes bright blue and curious. She chased a string of gauze across the floor, while Eleanor worked at her desk. The kitten's voice, high and melodic, echoed through the hallways like a tiny bell announcing renewal. Each morning, Rowan waited by the window before dawn, tail curled neatly, gaze fixed on the same spot where light first touched the glass. When Ash appeared, he chuffed softly, the sound deep and reassuring. The kitten answered in her own small voice, a dialogue no human language could match. Liam began recording their interactions with a handheld camera. He stood quietly outside, wearing his brown parka and patient smile, letting the lens capture what words could not. A wild bobcat pressing his body near the fence whenever the kitten mewed. The footage carried something sacred, nature reassembling its broken pieces. Eleanor watched the recordings at night, the glow from her monitor washing over her face. Each frame blurred the line between instinct and emotion. "You've become something else entirely," she whispered to the image of Rowan nuzzling the fence. "Not tame, not wild, just alive." The video spread beyond the refuge. Liam uploaded a short clip for research colleagues, and within days it reached local news. Comments poured in, people marveling at the unlikely tenderness of a predator. Donations followed, along with interviews. Aspen Valley's quiet miracle was now the valley's heartbeat. Reporters came, gentle but curious, setting up cameras by the fence. Rowan tolerated their presence with stoic patience, as long as Ash remained in sight. When flashes went off, he flattened his ears once, but didn't move away. The wild cat who once hid from people now stood calmly in front of them, guarding what he claimed as peace. Eleanor grew protective of his privacy. "Enough for today," she told the crew, her tone firm. When they left, she lingered by the window. Rowan's gaze met hers, and she swore there was gratitude in it. It wasn't ownership, it was trust. A fragile bridge built on countless silent mornings. That evening, wind rolled softly through the refuge. Liam played the video on a projector for the staff, Rowan and Ash side by side. the rhythm of their breathing synchronized. Kayla, the young caretaker, wiped her eyes. "It's like he's raising her," she whispered. "Like he remembers how to be whole." Rowan's behavior changed subtly over the weeks. He began to bring small twigs and pine cones to the fence, arranging them near the same spot each day. At first, Eleanor thought it coincidence. But after the 5th morning, she recognized a pattern. He was building something, or perhaps remembering how to provide. Ash mirrored him in her own way. She carried bits of cloth or toys to the window and left them by the glass. One morning, when the kitten pushed her paw against the pane, Rowan pressed his against the other side. The prints overlapped perfectly, wild strength and domestic fragility touching through silence. The staff grew quieter around the enclosure, lowering their voices, walking slower. It felt like stepping into a chapel made of snow and breath. Even the birds seemed to land closer, drawn by the stillness that radiated from Rowan's vigil. Life around him moved softer, reverent. One evening, thunderheads gathered over the ridge. Rain came in long sheets, drumming against tin roofs. Lightning split the valley, and power flickered. Eleanor rushed to check the animals, heart pounding as wind tore through the yard. She found Rowan sitting firm at the fence, unflinching, eyes fixed on the clinic window. Inside, Ash crouched near the glass, tail puffed, ears twitching with each rumble. But when Rowan's silhouette appeared against the lightning's flash, she stilled. The kitten pressed closer to the window, and her trembling ceased. On both sides of the glass, they waited out the storm, two souls anchored in shared calm. By dawn, the sky cleared. Steam rose from the drenched earth. Eleanor stepped outside, soaked boots squelching in the mud. Rowan blinked in the soft morning light, droplets clinging to his whiskers. She smiled. "You stayed all night." He chuffed once, low and proud, as if saying it was never a question. In the following days, something deepened. Rowan no longer seemed to guard the kitten. He seemed to teach her. When Ash leapt at moving shadows, he mirrored her with patient focus. When she rested, he matched her rhythm. Their worlds had found symmetry. Not by design, but by choice. Eleanor documented everything: heart rates, feeding schedules, eye contact durations, but the data meant less than the feeling. Each notation turned into confession. She wasn't cataloging animals anymore. She was witnessing grace. Rowan had turned loss into language, and the valley listened. When dusk came, the refuge bathed in amber light. Rowan sat near the fence, amber eyes glowing, fur brushed by wind. Inside, Ash curled in her bed, soft purr audible even through the glass. Liam stood nearby, filming the scene, whispering, "If peace had a shape, it would look like this." That night, Eleanor wrote in her journal, "Healing doesn't always mean returning to what was. Sometimes it means staying where love found you." She looked through the window one last time before turning off the light. Rowan remained at his post, unblinking, the quiet guardian of the small heartbeat that had rewritten his own. The days grew longer, and the first soft green of spring began to lace through the valley. The snow had vanished entirely now, leaving behind a hush of damp earth and new beginnings. Yet inside Aspen Valley Refuge, a question had begun to take root among the staff. One no one wanted to say aloud: what would happen when Rowan was forced to let go? Dr. Eleanor Hayes knew the time was near. The protocol required every rehabilitated animal to pass a separation assessment before release. It was standard, clinical, necessary, but nothing about Rowan had ever fit inside those boxes. She stood by his enclosure one morning, clipboard heavy in her hands, staring at him longer than she meant to. Rowan sat near the fence, eyes half closed, his breathing deep and even. He looked more like part of the valley now than a patient within it. The scar on his leg was barely visible beneath the thick russet fur. When Ash's voice rose faintly from inside the clinic, his ears turned instantly, body tightening as if pulled by an invisible thread. Liam Turner stood beside her, camera strap slung over his shoulder, voice low. "You're going through with the test?" Eleanor didn't answer right away. The Bobcat blinked slowly, the gesture calm but full of understanding. "I don't see another way," she finally said. though her throat ached around the words. Inside, Ash played on the examination table, batting at a feathered toy Kayla had brought in. The kitten had grown sleek and healthy, a tiny blur of silver fur and energy. When the staff carried her to the back room for the test, her mews echoed faintly through the halls, soft, questioning, unaware that this was the first step toward parting. Outside, Rowan's calm shattered. The moment the sound faded, he rose and began to pace the fence, tail whipping low. His breath came sharp and fast. The deep churring that once sounded like a lullaby now turned into a low, restless growl that rolled through the valley. Eleanor watched, heart tightening with every stride he took. "He senses it," she murmured. Liam adjusted his lens, capturing Rowan's agitation. But even through the viewfinder, he hesitated. The wildcat's distress was too human in its grief. "He's not ready," Liam whispered. "Neither of them are." Kayla's voice came through the radio from inside the clinic. "Ash is unsettled. She won't eat." Eleanor pressed the transmitter to her lips. "Try bringing her near the treatment window," she said. It broke every procedural rule, but the sound of the kitten's cry belonged to Rowan as much as to the refuge now. Moments later, the door opened, and Kayla stepped into the light, holding the kitten in her arms. Ash squirmed, mewing softly. Rowan froze mid-step, muscles trembling. He lowered himself to the ground, a sound deep and aching spilling from his chest. The tension in the air dissolved into something softer, almost reverent. For several minutes, no one moved. The kitten pressed her nose against the glass, and Rowan leaned close until the fence and window aligned, their reflections merging under the sunlight. Eleanor exhaled quietly, the decision she'd avoided now echoing inside her. She could not let them be parted. Not yet. Later that afternoon, she called a staff meeting in the break room. The air smelled of wet earth and coffee. "The test proves what we already knew," she began. "He isn't ready for release. If we force it, it'll break him and possibly her too." Silence met her words, thick and heavy. Then Liam nodded. "So what do we do?" "We give it time," Eleanor said. "Observation, not interference. Maybe he'll learn distance gradually." But deep down, she didn't believe it. Rowan had chosen his bond the way storms choose mountains to meet, to break, to change their shape forever. That night, rain whispered over the roof again, a softer echo of past storms. Rowan remained outside the clinic window, his eyes glowing faintly in the lamplight. Inside, Ash slept curled beside the heater, paws twitching as if chasing dreams. Every time she stirred, Rowan's ear flicked in response. Around midnight, a noise startled the refuge, a metallic clatter, sudden and sharp. Liam ran outside with his flashlight, beam slicing through the dark. The gate to Rowan's enclosure stood open, lock dangling broken. His breath caught. "He's out." They followed the tracks through the mud, hearts racing. The prints led not toward the forest but straight to the clinic door. Rowan stood there, massive and silent, his fur slicked with rain, amber eyes fixed on the window where the kitten slept. He hadn't fled, he had come closer. Eleanor approached slowly, voice low and steady. "It's okay," she murmured. "You're where you need to be." Rowan didn't move, didn't snarl. He simply looked at her, then back to the kitten inside. His entire body trembled once, then stilled. The storm in him was ending. With careful steps, Liam circled behind and closed the outer gate. No one spoke. The air was thick with the sound of breathing theirs, his, the earth's. Eleanor knelt, her knees sinking into mud. "We keep him here," she said finally, "until he chooses to leave." By dawn, the rain had stopped. The valley glistened under the first rays of light. Rowan lay curled near the clinic wall, soaked but peaceful, head resting on his paws. Inside, Ash stirred and pressed her paw against the glass. Outside, his larger paw met hers once again, completing the circle that no rule or protocol could break. And in that fragile stillness between wild and human, between instinct and choice, Eleanor understood at last. Some creatures are not meant to return to what they were. Some come back changed, not to be released, but to teach the world that love, too, can be untamed. The morning of release came bright and windless, the kind of day that promised clean departures. The valley shimmered beneath a pale sky, and the air carried the first warmth of April. From the upper path, the refuge looked calm, but inside its fences, hearts were anything but steady. Dr. Eleanor Hayes stood near the gate of Rowan's enclosure, clipboard tucked beneath her arm. She wore her olive flannel shirt under her khaki parka, scarf looped loose around her neck. The papers fluttered faintly in her hand. Every line of protocol said this was success. Yet her chest felt hollow. Rowan moved silently in the half-light of dawn, pacing once, twice, before settling near the fence. His russet gray coat shone thick and perfect. The scar on his hind leg had faded to a faint pale line. When he looked at the forest beyond, his ears flicked as if hearing something distant, something that had once called him home. Liam Turner came up the gravel path carrying the sedation kit. His red plaid shirt was visible beneath his brown parka, hair ruffled by the breeze. He met Eleanor's eyes without speaking. Both knew what the other felt but couldn't say aloud. Duty had its price. Kayla waited near the transport crate lined with fresh straw. The metal bars glinted under sunlight. "We're ready when you are," she said softly. Eleanor nodded, though her voice wouldn't come. She turned toward Rowan, the weight of years in the way she breathed. Inside the clinic, Ash was being moved to a quiet room. She mewed, confused by the bustle. The kitten's silver fur gleamed under the fluorescent light. "She'll be fine," Kayla had promised, but Eleanor heard the uncertainty in her tone. Some bonds were beyond containment. Outside, the dart clicked softly as Liam loaded it. Rowan watched him, unafraid. He recognized the man's rhythm, the slow lift of the tranquilizer gun, the steady breath behind the scope. When the dart struck his shoulder, he flinched once but did not run. He simply turned his head toward the clinic window. The sedative worked quickly. Rowan's muscles loosened, breath deepened. Liam and Eleanor moved carefully, covering him with a canvas blanket and sliding him into the crate. "Easy," Eleanor murmured, her gloved hand brushing his fur. "You've done everything right." Her voice cracked on the last word. Then it happened, the sound that no one expected. From inside the clinic came a sharp, desperate cry. Ash's mew, higher than ever, cut through the air like a thread pulling taut. Rowan's eyes snapped open. Even through the fog of sedation, his ears twitched, muscles tensed, heart pounding under Eleanor's palm. "He's waking," Liam said. But before he could move, Rowan surged. The crate rocked hard, metal rattling against concrete. His breath came ragged, wild. "Ash," Eleanor whispered. The name hung between them like a prayer. The Bobcat's strength returned in one violent burst. He slammed against the crate door until it gave. Straw flew. Liam stumbled back, shouting. Rowan landed heavily on the ground, legs unsteady but eyes blazing gold. He turned toward the clinic, ignoring everything else. "Don't shoot!" Eleanor's voice cut through the chaos. She stepped forward, palms raised. Rowan staggered once, then found his footing. The sedation slowed him, but will drove him forward. He moved toward the door, each step deliberate, unstoppable. Inside, Ash's cries grew louder. The kitten pressed her small body against the window, tail fluffed, eyes wide. Rowan reached the glass and pressed his head against it, releasing a low, rumbling call that trembled through the walls. Silence fell over the yard, heavy and unreal. For a moment, no one breathed. Liam lowered his tranquilizer rifle. Eleanor stood frozen, one hand covering her mouth. The world had narrowed to the sound of two heartbeats, one wild, one fragile, reuniting through a pane of glass. Minutes passed before Rowan sank slowly to the ground, exhaustion overtaking defiance. He lay facing the clinic window, chest rising in slow, uneven waves. The sedative finally claimed him, and his eyes closed. But even asleep, his paw stayed pressed against the wall. Eleanor knelt beside him, mud staining her knees. "He's not fighting freedom," she whispered. He's choosing where it lives. Liam said nothing, only watched as the wild cat breathed steady again. The violence replaced by quiet surrender. They postponed the release. The truck left empty, its tires marking wet tracks down the road. In its place came stillness, heavy but right. Rowan slept until afternoon, head resting near the clinic wall. Inside, Ash lay curled beside the window, her paw pressed to the same spot. When the sun dipped low, Eleanor walked to the fence and looked down at him. He stirred, blinking groggily, pupils narrowing in the golden light. "You're staying," she said softly. "We understand now." Rowan blinked once, slow and deliberate. That night, as the valley cooled under a silver moon, Rowan sat upright again, facing the window. The kitten's faint purr carried through the quiet. From her office, Eleanor wrote in her logbook, "The subject has refused release, displaying strong attachment response." Then she paused, added, "It's not dependency, it's devotion." Outside, wind brushed through the pines, and the fence rattled softly. Rowan's outline blurred against the moonlight, neither captive nor free, simply where he chose to be. And somewhere between them, the woman, the wild cat, the small gray heartbeat. The refuge held its breath and understood that freedom, sometimes, is the courage to stay. The first weeks after the failed release brought a new rhythm to Aspen Valley. Rowan was no longer a patient, but not quite a resident either. The staff quietly adjusted the signs on his enclosure from rehabilitation unit to sanctuary habitat. To anyone else, it was a simple change of title. To Eleanor, it was an admission of truth. Rowan had chosen his place. Each morning, she found him waiting near the same corner of the fence, his breath visible in the cool air, his amber eyes calm. He would sit until Ash appeared in the clinic window. The kitten, now older and agile, had grown into a soft, silver-furred cat with faint stripes blooming across her back. Their routine had become sacred. One would move, the other would mirror. Liam began filming the pair again for documentation. "This isn't science anymore," he said one afternoon, setting his tripod near the window. "It's devotion." Eleanor didn't argue. She had stopped labeling it months ago. Some things refused definition. They simply existed, like wind and gravity. Ash had started to venture outside for supervised playtime. The first time the door opened, she hesitated on the threshold, paws trembling against the damp soil. The air smelled of pine and sun-warmed stone. Rowan watched from behind the fence, ears perked, body tense with protective focus. When Ash stepped onto the grass, the bobcat rose and walked along the fence, pacing in rhythm with her movements. He stayed a few feet away, never growling, never startling her, only watching. Ash chased a drifting leaf, pounced clumsily, then looked up at him as if for approval. Rowan's tail flicked once in silent pride. The staff observed quietly. "He's teaching her the boundary," Kayla whispered, her voice barely louder than the wind. Eleanor nodded, "Or he's remembering what it means to guide." There was something ancient in the way the bobcat moved, less guardian than kin. By mid-May, wild visitors began appearing at the edge of the refuge. Deer, foxes, even another bobcat once, distant and fleeting. Rowan saw it before anyone else. His posture changed, ears forward, pupils narrowing, chest expanding with deep, steady breaths. For a moment, the air shimmered between two worlds, the one he'd left and the one he'd chosen. The second bobcat lingered at the tree line, sleek and golden under morning light. It watched the fence with curiosity, then vanished soundlessly into the pines. Rowan stood motionless, long after it disappeared. The wild in him stirred but not unleashed. Eleanor, watching from afar, whispered, "He's remembering, but he's not answering. We have Maine in this round." That evening, the weather shifted. The sky turned bruise-gray, and the wind carried the metallic scent of coming rain. Rowan grew restless. He circled his enclosure, eyes scanning the tree line. Ash meowed anxiously from inside, her small body pressed against the window. It felt like the night before the first storm all over again. Thunder rolled over the ridge, deep and slow. Rowan lifted his head, letting the wind sweep through his fur. A flash of lightning illuminated the valley, casting his shadow long and sharp across the snowless ground. Eleanor stood on the porch, rain beginning to fall on her coat, and whispered, "Not again." But it wasn't the same storm. This time, Rowan didn't pace or panic. He positioned himself directly in front of the clinic window, tail curled around his paws, body tall and unmoving. Ash crouched on the other side of the glass, blue eyes wide, fur rippling under the flicker of light. They faced the thunder together, unflinching. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the refuge soaked in silver under a pale sun. Steam lifted from the ground, and birds returned to the sky. Rowan stretched, shaking water from his fur, and yawned. Inside, Ash mirrored him almost perfectly. Eleanor laughed softly behind her coffee cup. "You two really are something," she said. Days passed quietly after that. Rowan hunted less and lounged more. He had learned the pattern of human hours, the opening of feed bins, the clang of buckets, the smell of morning coffee through open doors. Yet the wildness hadn't left him. It had simply become patient, deliberate, tempered by something stronger than instinct. One afternoon, Liam opened the outer gate to adjust the fencing. For a moment, Rowan stood at the threshold, the forest open before him, sunlight caught in his fur, the scent of pine and freedom curling through the air. Behind him, Ash meowed a small, uncertain sound that reached like a thread through the distance. Rowan looked back once, his amber eyes softened. Then, instead of stepping forward, he turned and walked back to the fence where the kitten sat inside the glass. Liam lowered his camera, stunned. He had his chance, he whispered, and he chose to stay. That night, as the sun bled red across the horizon, Eleanor stood outside watching him. Rowan sat at the same spot, fur glowing copper in the dying light. The kitten slept nearby, peaceful. "He's free already," Eleanor said quietly. "Just not in the way we thought." When the moon rose, it painted the world in blue and silver. Rowan lay on the cool earth, breathing slow and steady. The fence no longer seemed like a prison. It was a border he had redefined, a line between what was lost and what was found. Inside the clinic, Ash stirred in her sleep, tail twitching. Eleanor watched them both, the reflection of Bobcat and Kitten merging in the window's glass. And as wind drifted through the pines, she realized the truth that the wild had been teaching all along. Home isn't where you're free, it's where you choose to stay. By midsummer, Aspen Valley was alive with sound. Crickets thrummed in the grass, and the creek ran full from mountain melt. The refuge glowed gold beneath long daylight, but a new unease hung just beneath the calm. Rowan had begun watching the forest again, not with longing, but with attention. Something had changed in the air. Eleanor noticed first. Each dawn, the bobcat's ears flicked toward the same stretch of trees. He would rise, sniff the wind, and settle back, tail twitching with focus. "He's listening," she murmured to Liam one morning. "Something's out there." Liam nodded, lowering his camera. "Maybe another wildcat. Way." That afternoon, tracks appeared beyond the outer fence, prints nearly identical to Rowan's, smaller, lighter. The forest edge seemed to breathe differently, alive with unseen motion. Ash, grown now into a slender silver cat with sleek fur and bright, curious eyes, sat by the window, tail swaying nervously. The following night, the visitor came. Eleanor woke to the sound of a deep, rolling growl outside her cabin. She grabbed her lantern and stepped into the yard, the air warm and heavy. Near the far fence, two shapes moved, one large, one leaner. Rowan stood like a shadow carved from moonlight, facing a younger bobcat crouched beyond the mesh. The new arrival was female, smaller, with tawny fur and yellow-green eyes. Her coat shimmered under the moon. She hissed once, testing the distance. Rowan did not answer in anger, only with a low, rumbling sound that carried the weight of recognition. Eleanor froze, realizing what she was seeing. Not rivalry, but a kind of acknowledgement. For hours, the two cats mirrored each other through the fence, pacing and circling, exchanging silent codes written in instinct. Ash, perched at the clinic window, watched with wide eyes, tail flicking nervously. The world outside the glass hummed with ancient tension, half threat, half invitation. At sunrise, the female was gone. Only her paw prints remained in the mud, leading back to the forest. Rowan stayed by the fence long after, motionless, amber eyes fixed on the tree line. Eleanor stood a few yards away, whispering to herself. He remembers what it means to belong out there. Over the next week, the visitor returned often, sometimes calling softly from the shadows, a guttural hum that made the hair on Eleanor's arms rise. Rowan would answer with a brief chirr, low but steady. The exchange was calm, never violent, but something wild flickered in his eyes again, a glimmer Eleanor had both missed and feared. Ash began to notice the change too. She grew restless at night, pacing the windowsill, her silver fur bristling each time she heard the female's distant call. One evening she mewed plaintively, and Rowan turned sharply toward her, torn between two worlds divided by wire and glass. When the female approached again, closer this time, Liam was ready with the camera. The scene unfolded in soft twilight. Rowan near the fence, the female just beyond it, their movements deliberate and elegant. "It's like he's teaching her the border," Liam whispered. Eleanor only nodded, unable to look away. Then, for the first time, Rowan stepped back from the fence. He didn't snarl or pace. He simply withdrew, turned toward the clinic window, and sat facing the kitten inside. The female watched for a moment longer, blinked slowly, then melted back into the forest, silent as dusk itself. That night, rain returned to the valley. The wind carried scents of wet earth and pine resin. Rowan sat unmoving near the glass, his fur slick, eyes soft. Inside, Ash pressed close, her nose fogging the window. Their reflection in the glass merged again, wild and domestic, instinct and comfort in one heartbeat. Eleanor recorded the encounter in her logbook, though her handwriting trembled. Subject encountered female bobcat interaction non-aggressive, behavioral response, withdrawal toward familiar environment. She stared at the words before adding a final note. He chose home. Days later, she found Rowan lounging in sunlight, belly up, utterly at ease. His ear flicked toward her as she approached. "You could have gone," she said softly. "You still can." He blinked once, slow and deliberate, the kind of answer she had learned to accept. Ash leapt onto the windowsill, her silver fur shining in afternoon light. Rowan lifted his head, their eyes meeting through the glass. The forest behind him swayed, green and infinite, but he didn't turn toward it. He closed his eyes instead, purring faintly. The visitor did not return. Summer deepened, and the valley quieted again. Rowan grew heavier, his coat thick and glossy, the scar on his leg nearly invisible. The line between wild and refuge had blurred entirely now. He wasn't a captive, he was a keeper. In late August, Liam captured one final image. Rowan lying beneath a pine tree, the kitten sleeping inside the window behind him, their shapes aligned by morning light. "You can feel it," he said, showing Eleanor the photo. "The world found its balance here." She smiled faintly, eyes glistening. "Maybe freedom isn't about distance. Maybe it's about peace." Outside, Rowan stirred in his sleep, tail flicking once. Ash's small paw pressed against the glass in answer. The two of them joined not by fences or fate, but by quiet choice, the kind that echoes long after the wild has gone still. Autumn came quietly to Aspen Valley. The hills turned copper and gold, and the wind carried the smell of dry leaves and wood smoke. The refuge, once busy with repairs and visitors, had grown calm again. Most of the rescued animals had been released, their stories fading into the wilderness. Only Rowan remained a silent testament to the wild that chose to stay. Dr. Eleanor Hayes rose before dawn each day, coffee steaming in her hands as she walked the familiar path to his enclosure. At 60 now, the years felt heavier in her bones. but they also brought a strange kind of peace. She found Rowan in his usual spot, stretched beneath the pines, fur dusted with fallen leaves, eyes half closed but aware. "Morning, old friend," she said softly. He blinked once, slow and deliberate. Ash, now fully grown, had become the refuge's quiet companion. Her silver-gray fur gleamed like frost, her blue eyes thoughtful and calm. She followed Eleanor everywhere, into the office, the yard, even to Rowan's fence. Each time she appeared, the Bobcat's amber eyes softened. Their connection had outlived explanation. It simply was. One crisp morning, Liam arrived early to capture footage for the refuge's anniversary video. His beard was thicker now, hair longer, eyes a little wiser. He set up the camera by the fence while Rowan watched from his usual place. "He looks different," Liam murmured. Eleanor smiled faintly. "He's not a patient anymore. He's a presence." The lens captured what words couldn't, the golden leaves spinning through the air, the bobcat breathing steady, and the silver cat sitting by the fence, their reflections merging in the sunlight. When Liam played it back, there was no sound except wind and heartbeat. It felt like the valley itself was exhaling. But time, even in peaceful places, has a way of reminding you. It moves forward. The nights grew colder, and Rowan began to slow. His coat thickened, but his pace gentled. He ate less, slept longer, and often lifted his head only when Ash appeared at the window. "He's aging," Eleanor whispered one evening. Liam placed a quiet hand on her shoulder. "Maybe he's finally resting." That winter, snow returned to the valley. The world outside turned white, and the silence deepened. One morning, Eleanor found Rowan curled beneath his favorite pine, unmoving but peaceful, breath shallow. She knelt beside him, her gloved hand brushing his fur. "Hey, boy," she murmured. His amber eyes fluttered open once, fixing on her face. Then they shifted toward the window. Inside, Ash pressed her paw to the glass, tail still. Her blue eyes glowed against the pale light. Rowan's breath came one last time, slow, steady, complete. The stillness that followed wasn't grief, but gratitude. Eleanor closed her eyes, tears freezing on her lashes. "You found home," she whispered. The refuge held a quiet vigil that evening. Snow fell heavy and soft, blanketing his enclosure. Liam filmed the falling flakes against the pines, saying nothing. Kayla set a lantern near the fence. The wind hummed through the valley like a lullaby. And for a moment, it felt as if the wild itself was bowing in respect. When spring returned, the world carried traces of him everywhere. His paw prints remained faintly etched in the soil near the fence. Ash often sat there at dusk, her fur glowing in the last light. She no longer cried at the window. She only watched the horizon as if expecting him to appear in the distance. Eleanor placed a carved wooden sign by his favorite spot. Rowan, the one who chose to stay. Beneath it, she planted wild thyme, the scent rising sweet with each breeze. It wasn't a grave, but a memory made visible, a reminder that not all freedom lives in open spaces. Some of it roots itself in love. Over time, visitors began coming to see the sanctuary, drawn by Rowan's story. They spoke softly near the fence, as if entering a cathedral. Liam's film, The Bobcat Who Stayed, spread far beyond the valley, reminding people that wildness and gentleness could share the same breath. On the refuge's 10th anniversary, the staff gathered at dusk. The air was clear, the mountains etched in silver. Ash sat quietly beside Eleanor's chair, eyes half closed, tail wrapped around her paws. The world was different now, but the bond remained unbroken. As the sun dipped, a breeze passed through the pines, bending the wild thyme near the fence. It carried a familiar sound, low, steady, like the rumble of distant thunder. Eleanor smiled through her tears. "He's still here," she whispered. Liam nodded, lowering his camera. "He always will be, in time." And as the stars rose over Aspen Valley, the refuge settled into silence once more. The glass of the clinic window reflected a silver cat, and, faintly, the outline of a bobcat beside her. Two shapes, two hearts, one wild, one gentle, forever meeting in the quiet space between freedom and home. If this story touched your heart, just drop a 1 in the comments, or a 0 if it stayed quiet inside you. Don't forget to subscribe, there are more gentle stories waiting, just beyond the trees.